everyone. And as we ease out of lockdown, there seems to be two key dates, doesn't there? The 15th of June, when we know that non-essential shops will be able to reopen, and that's really about what today is. And then the 4th of July, yet to be confirmed, when all of those that are in the hair and beauty industry, cinemas, pubs, restaurants, I think are all gearing up to reopen if the government announces that. What we all know, and I'm sure you are feeling, is a very fast moving and complex time. And actually the rules are being changed, it seems, very frequently, which obviously makes it incredibly difficult for you as businesses. But actually it also makes it very difficult for those that are in regulatory services to keep abreast of that and interpret the government guidelines. So I'm really pleased to invite to speak today a panel from the team at Merton's Regulatory Services Partnership. And just to give a bit of context about them, this partnership, the regulatory services, is actually across 3 boroughs, Richmond, Wandsworth and Merton. So the name of the people here do operate across the 3 boroughs. So obviously they have massive exposure to a great many businesses. The total team includes 60 highly experienced and knowledgeable regulatory practitioners, covering licensing, environmental health, trading standards and street trading and pollution. So that covers all the air, water, noise and pest control as well. And we also have with us today our Principal Highways Officer, Steve Cooper there. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from each of them. Paul is going to start us off, and I will introduce each of them as we go through and just give some context about what they're going to cover. That should take about 20 to 25 minutes, so please get your questions ready as they go through and we will take those at the end. So we'll have plenty of time for you to ask very specific questions. So I think that's it from me for now. So I'm going to introduce Paul Milosevsky-Reed. He is going to cover how to be COVID-19 secure, factors in driving consumer confidence, queuing, and a little around e-commerce and click and collect. So Paul, welcome. Come on in. You'll need to unmute yourself. You're there ready to go. So welcome. I'll hand over to you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. Unmuted? Yes, everything working? You hear
all
me?
Good.
Perfect. Okay. So I appreciate some of you may have come across some of the service from the RSP before. Others may not have. We've part of the council. We advise micro businesses up to multinationals. I've come across lots of businesses and which have particular perceptions about who we are and what regulators are about. So just to kind of dispel the myth, we're not about business police. We're not about catching out businesses. We're there to enforce the various regulations that help keep everybody on the same level playing field. So helping honest businesses do the right thing and guiding consumers about what their rights are. Now, it's one thing saying to you that we are, a friend of business, but I just thought it was helpful to give you just a couple of examples of what we've been doing in the background the last 2 months since the situation has developed. When we looked at the government guidance for businesses, we recognised that there wasn't much information. It wasn't very clear that click and collect was an option for businesses that were closed. So we had government update the guidance to make that clearer. We recognise that the force majeure laws, so these are the laws that basically allow a business to exit a contract when it's impossible. However, unlike in other jurisdictions, it doesn't allow you to cancel a contract simply because it's no longer economical to go through with the contract. So lots of businesses are really struggling, cancelling contracts with consumers and businesses, and the law really isn't up to speed to deal with that. So we were pushing for government to review the law in that area. We've received lots of queries from businesses and concerns, and one of them was around, obviously we know government gave financial protection for the retail hospitality industry, but not for the suppliers. to that industry. So that's something that we identified and raised. Now, going forward, the RSP was successful in bidding for some funding, which now allows us to allocate resources to provide free, tailored advice to businesses around COVID compliance. So this webinar isn't going to be the only bit of advice that we'll be providing. Going forward, there'll be contacts into the team. So if you've got particular queries at any point here in the weeks and months to come, you'll be able to contact the team and get some advice for free. So first of all, the disclaimer, which was touched on earlier, this is fast moving. We are not getting advance notice of the regulations. We don't get any special guidance on how to interpret these rules. So we're playing catch up a lot, like businesses and consumers as well. What we do though is we discuss any grey areas across the teams and also within our profession nationally. So hopefully we can have a consistent approach whenever we're advising any business in any part of the country. As well as our normal kind of workloads, in the last 2 months, we've been part of the council response and going out to businesses, doing drive-by visits, making sure that businesses are complying with the various rules, and at that time picking up any queries and concerns. And this webinar really captures some of the common questions that we've had from businesses, so hopefully we'll answer those, but we'll then follow up with an FAQ session to pick up anything that we miss. So as far as we can see, you know, from the 15th onward, we're going to have this split, aren't we, between all non-essential shops opening up, but then your pubs, restaurants, gyms, health centres still being closed until the government decides that it's the right time. Now, all open businesses, obviously we can't cover all the regs in detail on all the new guidance because it's sector specific as well. But in a nutshell, all businesses that are opening up need to be COVID-19 secure. So there's new guidelines around that. All closed businesses can still continue to operate through the e-commerce and click and collect model. Now, permission to open is one factor. So government has said, great, all non-essential retailers can now open, but consumer confidence is obviously a key important factor. How do we encourage shoppers to come back? Because it's not just a case of opening up the doors, isn't it? You may have seen some surveys done by Which and others. About a third of consumers don't feel safe going into shops right now. Shopping centres did similar surveys where 60% of people were saying we expect shops to check customer temperatures before they walk into the store. So there is a concern out there, and we need to look at how can we counter that and communicate to business consumers that businesses are doing everything they need to keep customers safe. Now, there's three aspects that I see. One is government guidance. So following the general guidance to employers, so that's your 5 steps to working safely, which covers things like carrying out your COVID-19 risk assessment, developing cleaning, hygiene procedures, maintaining 2-meter social distancing in store, so things like putting down floor tape, having one-way systems. So that guidance goes into quite a lot of detail about things that you need to consider. And that's applicable to all businesses. And then we have sector-specific guidance. And again, that gets a lot more detailed. So the guidance in relation to shops and branches, that will be relevant to all the high street retailers. That touches on things such as, do you have hand sanitizers at the premise entrance? Encourage consumers to use the hand sanitizer before they enter. How can you avoid customers handling while browsing? So having some policy that, you know, only pick up products that you're going to buy. It talks about things about considering rotating high touch stock. So fairly detailed. So that's the government guidance. You then got your own shop policies, your own internal business policies, and that will cover things such as how many customers do you let in at a time from one given family, one group. Do you have a policy around face coverings? So government has said, you know, face coverings will be essential on public transport and where 2-meter distance can't be maintained, it's recommended. So stores need to consider whether they make it a requirement to enter the store. Do you need a face covering? And there's questions around that, because obviously there's some people, there's exceptions to that. So 2-year-old children and people that have particular breathing difficulties are exempt from that requirement. So how do you deal with those? And also, how do you maintain customer loyalty? You know, customers coming, they're wanting to come in and spend money in your store. It's not going to give them a good feeling if they're being turned away because they don't have a face coverings. So you may need to consider selling face coverings at the door, but you need to be very careful that it's clear that that's being sold at cost price. You know, the business isn't trying to profit from these circumstances to keep customer loyalty. Now, around face coverings, there's hundreds of reports coming in nationally around fake face coverings. So ones that are misdescribed, ones that come with fake certificates. So you need to be very careful about where you're sourcing those if you do wish to buy them and sell them. There's also lots of problems around fake antibody testing kits, so something to be aware of generally, in terms of lots of scams out there at the moment affecting consumers and businesses. Some businesses are wanting to sell PPE or face coverings or testing kits. So be very mindful. There's a lot of fraudulent activity taking place, and government at a national level is trying their best to close these sites down where they appear. So that's one aspect of company policy. The others will be around queuing. So some customers are not respecting the 2-meter distance. So how do you deal with those if they're queuing to get into your premise and they're not queuing sensibly in a socially distanced manner? Do you refuse entry? Something to consider. One of the questions that came up in the last webinar was what is the liability of businesses if they're doing the right thing and putting out markings on the floor where people can queue sensibly 2 meters apart? Where's my liability if customers are not respecting that? Well, if customers are fighting, obviously that's a police matter, and that gets dealt with in the normal way. If it's just a case of somebody's not respecting the social distancing rules, that will be something that we, the regulators, will consider. And our policy is, as long as businesses doing what they can, what's reasonable for them to maintain orderly queues into the premise, and they're working with their stores next door to make sure that queues don't mix up, so you're doing it in a sensible way, then we're not going to take any issue with the business. That's obviously an issue with a particular customers, and you would have to consider whether you have a policy of refusing such customers at that time. So then the third aspect is, you're doing all these good things, you're following government guidance, you've got the right sort of company policies in place to make sure that you're keeping your staff and customers safe. But the third important thing is obviously communicating that to consumers, because if they don't know, they're not going to have that confidence to come in and shop. So government guidance talks about signage, having one-way systems. My only comment around that would be, wherever possible, try and use pictorial rather than written signage. And that's not just simply because there's language barriers between different customers, but we're all consumers, and we know we don't read signage. So the simpler the message is, the more likely it is people will follow it. You've then, when you do your internal risk assessment for COVID compliance, there's a We Are COVID Secure notice that you can display prominently on your premise. You can put it on your website. So that would be really important in letting your customers know you've done everything that's expected of you to keep your premise and your business and your staff working safely. And obviously, other than that notice, you could even go further and publish the risk assessment that you've done. So that risk assessment is a very detailed document. And what that does is, that shows that you really went through in very great detail, looking at all your processes to ensure that you're minimizing the risk to your customers and to your staff. Now, I would urge businesses to put that out. It might be a long document, and not everybody will read it, but it shows complete transparency to customers and suppliers that you're dealing with. It shows that you've thought about these things. I think that's going to be incredibly important to getting businesses back to normal. Now, I'm just going to touch briefly on e-commerce. We are looking to do more detailed webinars around e-commerce, social media, etc., going forward as part of the funding that we managed to obtain. All I'll say around this is obviously, you know yourself, there's various options of having your own website or using marketplaces like your eBay's, Amazon, using social media networks to get out your products and advertise yourselves. The key thing I think I would just say in covering e-commerce in a nutshell is to think about trust in everything you do, because if you talk to any consumers buying online, trust is the key factor in them making a decision from visiting to buying a product. Obviously, there's no physical premise they're aware of. There's no store owner in which a consumer can gauge the store owner's facial expressions to build up that trust. So you need to think about trust about you as the entity. And I give as an example, as I say, we look at all businesses all the way up to multinationals, and even a lot of the big national companies are burying their addresses and their entity information in terms and conditions. So consumers have no details about really who's behind that flashy website. That's trust in the business, trust in the goods. How do you get across that you are taking the right processes to make sure that the goods that you're selling are virus-free? And confidence in returns. So if you're into e-commerce, obviously depending on what sector you're in, there will be a lot of products coming back that are being returned for whatever reason. What process do you have in place to quarantine it, to clean it? And again, how do you communicate that on your website and any other information going out to consumers? Okay, I'll just wrap up by making you all aware to the fact that I touched on it about scams earlier. There's lots of scams going around targeting businesses. So you'll get emails pretending they're from NHS or a government department offering financial aid to the business. So the best piece of advice I can give is always visit the official, gov.uk website and search within that site for the information you're looking on. Never click within the links that you get through. If you've never come across a phishing website, it looks exactly like the real thing and when you get to the website. So it's very easy to be taken in by it. So do be aware of that. Okay, that's it for myself.
Good, thank you, Paul. I think lots of information in there. I'm sure it's going to bring some questions with it, but really good. And the one thing I really took from that is about the trust, isn't it? I think that's all very attitudinal thing at the moment, that people need to trust and be confident in what they're doing. So we'll come back to that. Now, our next speaker was going to be Heather Bailey from Environmental Health, but she's got connection problems. So we're going to go straight on to her colleague, Elizabeth Donald, who's going to cover licensing issues around alcohol off sales, massage and special treatments, and animals. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Hello. I'm just going to really cover some of the main things that we've been dealing with and some things maybe to think about. As has been said before, we're moving forward into a potentially very different trading environment, and now might be a good time to have a look at any licenses, permissions and conditions on such, and how they can maybe be amended if you're thinking to change the mode of any operations, or a good time to check that the information on any licenses, such as names and addresses, etc., that they're actually correct, and get them changed or varied as necessary. We deal with the Licensing Act, which covers authorisations for the sale and supply of alcohol, regulated entertainment, and late night refreshment. Late night refreshment is hot food, which is supplied after 11 at night and before 5 o'clock the next day. So we've had some queries about on and off sales, and obviously you can't supply alcohol or food of any kind really on the premises. only off the premises at the moment, and you would need, if it's late night refreshment or alcohol, you would obviously need a specific authorization to do so, an off sale for alcohol. There are obviously going to be some problems with people causing a nuisance outside from drinking, and I'm not sure whether you're aware, but there is a borough-wide public space protection order which relates to alcohol. And what that means is that if any behaviour is likely to cause alarm, harassment, or distress to others, then the alcohol can be seized and various warnings given to the people who have had the alcohol and are causing the issues. This is dealt with by the police and our Safer Merton colleagues. But there is also a possibility that any licence that the alcohol is sold under could be brought in for review by the council, where the alcohol has been supplied and can be directly attributed to any of the problems that have been seen. So if you can actually show that these problems have come from a...
So, Elizabeth, you've muted. You've muted. You need to unmute yourself if you can, please. Sorry.
Done?
Yeah,
no, that's fine.
Just go back a couple of sentences if you can. Thank you.
So did we get about the public space protection orders?
No, go on.
Okay.
Do that. Yeah.
So we've got a borough-wide public space protection order which relates to alcohol, and it means that if there is behaviour that is likely to cause alarm, harassment or distress to others, then that alcohol can be seized and various warnings given to the people who've been drinking. This is dealt with by the police and our Safer Merton colleagues in the main, but there's also the possibility that the licence could be brought in for review from where the alcohol was supplied, and if any problems can be directly attributed to that premises. We also cover massage and special treatments. This includes nail bars, sunbeds, tattooing, piercing, massage, manicure, pedicures. There are a lot of other ones, but those are the common ones. Unfortunately, these premises have had to close because they're specified in the legislation as having to close. And we're still, as has been said before, awaiting a date when these will be allowed to open. We're thinking maybe the 4th of July. It's just been muted. It's not obviously a date that we can go with. I think they're probably going to be amongst the last because you can't really social distance when giving these treatments. But we have had a lot of queries about opening if certain procedures are put in place by the owners of these premises. Unfortunately, we can't override legislation, and it is for the government to rule on the easing of trading for these restrictions. We also deal with the licensing of animals, which is pet shops, horse riding establishments, animal boarding. There's a couple of others, obviously. And we've had a lot of queries about dog grooming establishments, which we don't actually license, but because they're a service, they can actually open as long as they cover health and safety and social distancing requirements. Borders can open. Again, they've got to show social distancing and health and safety requirements. So they are the basics of the main queries that we've been having, really. And that's all I have to say at the moment.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And you know, such a breadth of types of businesses that you're covering. It's fascinating in itself. So I'm sure there'll be some questions. Right, we're going to now move on to David Ryan from Street Trading. And David's going to talk to us really about individual stalls, markets, forecourts, tables and chairs and the like. So over to you, David. Welcome.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Yes, I'm also within the licensing team with Elizabeth, but my speciality is in street trading. Now, this is for any goods and services offered on the public highway. So this generally covers people that put tables and chairs outside restaurants and bars, any forecourts for, say, grocery shops that might be out the front there, individual food vans that might be dotted around the borough, individual market stalls, and also operated markets. So ones like you'll see that Love Wimbledon operate at the Piazza, and also some markets we have in Mitcham as well. So all of those are covered under a street trading license, which a license holder needs to hold in order to operate on the street legally. There's quite a lot that's come up just recently with the street trading. Unfortunately, it's been thrust to the forefront of everything that everyone's doing because we're all now out on the street. Steve will probably cover some under the highway section of this talk. But the issue we have at the moment is who's out on the street, who can be out on the street, and where the government's going to want everyone to start operating in the near future. We have a process that we follow every time we issue a license, which looks at how much space is available. Now, most businesses that have a license have already gone through this, but if we move more out onto the street as a country at the moment, that's going to have an impact on the availability of the spaces there for social distancing for the general public. So there's quite a lot of work to be done on it. Unfortunately, it's changing every day, as I'm sure you can all appreciate. So I'm sure there might be some questions from people coming up that maybe need to shift the focus of their operation to the street, which we'll answer as we go through it. But we might be slightly delayed in some of the answers because at the moment we just don't know. Presently, anyone that has a tables and chairs license is not allowed to use it because no tables and chairs should be on the public highway. So part of the visits we've been doing across the borough and across the other boroughs as well is ensuring compliance with that. Now, people that are offering food, such as grocers, are allowed to put their wares outside on the street still. But other than that, virtually all street trading has stopped at present. The only thing we should see out there is maybe a food trader or a market stall that's been allowed to operate under the restrictions. Come the 15th, obviously, the non-essential retail will open up, which will allow more market stalls to be out in the main. We're not going to change anything in relation to the tables and chairs as yet, because there's no restrictions being lifted. And obviously forecourts is something we have to look at as well. Most people that do forecourts are food businesses, in all honesty. So there's not so much of a problem there, but we'll have to look at the guidance as it gets updated. Come July, it could change again. And like everyone else, we'll wait for Boris's next announcement on what the new restrictions are going to be. But if people are out there, if they're trading on the street, they do require a license. We've renewed licenses for those that have been operating at present. So if someone has a street trading license that allows them to sell food and they've been trading throughout the lockdown period, then they will have been traded under a renewed license. Anyone else, we've held back on fees and we've held back on the license itself until the point of renewal. So if any businesses on here have actually got a license, I see Mick's on here, he's got a license outside the pub for the tables and chairs. So when that comes up and when those chairs can go out, the license would start from that date. So all the renewal dates have changed and they will change as we go along. But we just had to shift it to make it easier for businesses. Our first initial thought was to renew the licenses as normal and then just charge pro rata as and when business started using them. But because of the difficulties in businesses actually not being open and receiving the post, whatever the case may be, we felt it easier to give a little bit of leeway and say, okay, when you start, let us know. We'll restart the license, we'll renew the license from that point. And obviously we'll have discussions in regards to the fees from then on, because that's when the service will actually be used. But for other people operating normally, those charges are in place now. We had a brief period where they weren't, but as restrictions have eased, so obviously the charges have come back into place. We also deal with illegal traders on the street as well. So we're not asking you to tell tales on anyone, but should obviously these things come up, it affect your businesses because someone's popped up outside selling the same thing as you and they shouldn't be there. We haven't issued anything. So by all means, get in contact with us and let us know. I'll leave it there for now. That roughly covers most of the street trading activity in the borough. Obviously, any questions, please feel free to send them through to us.
Thank you, David. Now, I said earlier that Heather Bailey from Environmental Health wasn't able to connect. I think she is here now, and she's also shared now by Helen Clark, not Helen Clark Bell from Love Wimbledon, but Helen Clark, who is also the Commercial Services Manager at the Council. So I'm just going to ask if Heather could just speak, and then we'll know whether you're there or not. Come on in, Heather. I can't see you. You are there. Lovely. Welcome.
Can you
Go
see
ahead.
me?
I can see you beautifully.
I apologise
Yeah.
for my delay. We've had a few IT issues, but hopefully all sorted now. So I'm Heather Bailey. I'm an Environmental Health Officer from Merton Council, and we're here today obviously to assist you with running your businesses and reopening your business to make sure that yourselves, your staff and your customers are safe, and that you've got the necessary safe working procedures in place. The area that we cover is quite wide, and so rather than go through each of the areas, I'll just be open for your questions. Mainly what we'll be advising you is that all businesses will be required to complete a risk assessment before opening, and even if you're already open, you'll still be required to complete that risk assessment. We have the necessary templates available, and we're also going to be available to give you any advice and guidance that you'll need to open your business. And we'll be here to support you. There'll be various links and documents available to you after this webinar and also on Merton Council's website. Sorry, and you'll also be able to contact me directly with specific questions about your business.
Lovely, thank you, Heather. Right, so whilst you're getting your questions ready, and I already have a couple that I will ask people to ask. Actually, I think if you want to put your questions in the chat box, and then that's an easier way for me to invite people in. So I already have one from Ian Doxey and Simon Plum, and I will come to you in a minute. But just while you're thinking about your questions then and doing some of that, just to say a number of people that we also have in the session today who are offering solutions and guidance to businesses coming out of lockdown. So we have Steve Bennett from Safety Delivery, who has prepared an office procedures checklist, and I know there is a question about that. We've got Sylvia Anderson, who is a food hygiene consultant, and we have Anthony Dennington from Positive Images, who have a new website all offering social distancing and hygiene solutions. And also in the audience from Love Wimbledon, Helen Clark-Bell, who Love Wimbledon is supporting businesses in the town centre with pavement vinyls and business opening campaigns. So there's a lot of people in the audience, as well as the Regulatory Services Partnership team, who are here to support businesses in their opening. Now, all that information is available on the Merton Chamber website. So if you go onto the website, our website, you will find, so for example, Steve's checklist is on there, and we will be doing all the resources at the end as well. So right, let's go to some questions. So first of all then, I'm going to go to Ian Doxey, who I know had a question about employers' responsibilities for employees. So when you speak, if you unmute yourself.
Can I just very quickly say
waving.
that it's
Yes.
Elizabeth from Licensing.
Yes,
Steve Cooper has not had his little spiel. Bless his heart. He's probably wishing nobody had noticed.
Steve. Well, okay, we've got even more time for you to prepare your questions then. And many apologies to Steve. It's because I went back to the beginning of my brief, so my mistake, everyone. So welcome then. Steve Cooper from Highways is going to tell us about social distancing, the stickers, the queuing, etc. So Steve, welcome. My apologies. Come on in.
No worries. I thought I'd got away with it then. Can everyone hear me okay? So if I just start off by saying a couple of things that get missed. So a public highway is the legal term used where the public have a right of passage. Now that's the footway and the road. It also includes footpaths and bridleways, which sometimes get forgotten. And it's important we remember that a highway is a global term for anywhere where the public is allowed to traverse. It's not just the pavement or the road. Social distancing measures, this will obviously reduce available footway space, and there is a good chance this will impact into road space. I'm from Merton. I'm not one of the tri-boroughs that the other colleagues here are. I am only for Merton. But I'm sure you'll realise as a borough that we're implementing temporary social distancing schemes to share road space. This is predominantly more in line with moving cycles into a safe environment on roads where there aren't cycle lanes, or further protection around cycle lanes that exist. They are on our website, which will be given to you as a link later on. There's a cabinet meeting coming up as well, which will give us some further measures, we hope. They will be clearly marked though, and it is to give those users the opportunity to be safer than they might be currently. We know these will be around high footfall areas, and we anticipate that the social distancing queuing will be greater. Obviously, we're not able to implement this across every shop or every store or even at every bus stop around the borough. But I'm sure you'll agree with me, you know where these areas are that are reduced, and we do need to protect those. It's very clear from the interest from this webinar that you're all taking an active role in protecting and providing safe environments for both your employees as well as the businesses and of course your customers. And it's important that we're here to help you with that. I know David touched on the if you're illegally trading, we've got to take action. Of course, those things happen, but it's about working together to get you and your customers back and your businesses up and running. I anticipate you're going to want to know about measures you can put in place on the footway outside your premises. I strongly urge you, please don't use paints, especially household glosses and automotive paints in spray form. It's very difficult to get that neat. Merton's print room is actually printing stickers for those who've not already sourced their own yet, at a very competitive price, might I add. And of course, posters that you can display in the shop. We'll be giving you the details along with the links at the end of this webinar as well. I'm sure some of you will have gone out and bought stencils ready. I can only stress again, if you have bought a stencil, I'm really hopeful that you've got the stencil paint, which is a temporary paint. It wears off, probably no more than 3-4 weeks worth of use and it will wear off. Don't use permanent paints, please. Barriers and ropes, these can cause a problem because every barrier comes with a foot. The foot takes up space. We know we're trying to maintain social distancing, but if you put a barrier in place as well, you're starting to push people closer and closer to the road, and the temptation is to step off the edge of the pavement into the road. As people start to move about more, we've already seen increases in traffic, and the pedestrian to vehicle collision in an attempt to move around someone queuing outside your store would just be a real disaster, really. So if you can use the stickers, and people will follow that social distancing, it's become more and more regularly used, so people are used to it. I think that will be sufficient. As David said, it's a changing world. Paul mentioned it as well. I'm sure there'll be updates that will come out, and we'll do our best to keep those on the website as quick as we can. We are playing catch up. We can only work with the information that we're given. So I hope you appreciate we're going to do our best to work with you. I know this isn't everything. I'm sure there will be a few questions, but I hope I've provided some of the information around the highways that you might be seeking. But more importantly, I really thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, right. I'm going to go straight into questions because obviously I know we want to get them in. So as I said, Ian Doxey has one about employer responsibilities. So when I invite you to speak, if you could just unmute yourself and come on in. So Ian, you unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all being done. Okay, social distancing, hygiene. There has been talk about thermometers and checking temperatures for shops. Does that apply to the workplace as well?
Okay, so Ian actually operates out of an office, don't you, Ian?
But warehouse and office.
Warehouse and office, yeah. Okay. So Paul, is that one for you or
yeah,
someone?
I can pick that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, Ian, so there's guidance for employers to employees, and it talks about things like making sure that you have hand washing facilities available, encouraging staff to wash their hands every 30 minutes. There is quite a lot of detail in there. The thermometer thing is not a requirement. That is something that came up as a concern when consumers were surveyed about going back to shops. So 60% of consumers said we'd like shops to check people's temperature. But like with all surveys, it depends how you ask the question. If the question was, would you like temperature checked? Most people would probably say yes. But if the question was, what steps would you like high street retailers to take? It might be that would not have come up. So we need to take that with a pinch of salt, but it comes back to what we've discussed through the webinar, which is trust. How do you give customers the maximum confidence that you're doing everything to protect your staff keeping your staff that they'll be working next to virus-free and protected, and keeping your customer protected when they're in the store, be near your staff or near other customers. And at the end of the webinar, we will send out links which will definitely include the few government guides about what employers need to think about. And this isn't just retail shops, this also looks at people who are self-employed, having to go into people's homes. There's guidance for that sector as well. So we'll circulate all those, yeah?
Yeah, it's very detailed guidance, isn't it, Paul? So yeah, we'll make sure that you have access to that. Right, now we have a question from Simon Plum, who is the manager of Centre Court Shopping in Wimbledon, about how to calculate the maximum number of customers in a store, or indeed the whole shopping centre. Simon, do you want to add to that? Come on in.
Yeah, so obviously I'm aware that there's no specific calculation requirements given by the government, and up and down the country shopping centres are all trying to work out exactly what their occupancy should be, and there's various different calculations that come up with absolutely huge number of customers or an absolutely tiny number of customers. I just wondered if there was anyone that on this call that has a preferred or something that they've seen and that they're quite reliant on to calculate, and perhaps that's the one that I give the guidance to for the shopping centre owners, and indeed for the shops.
Okay, is that Paul again? Go on.
Yeah. As you, and by all means, any of my colleagues can chip in if you know otherwise, but as you said, there's nothing in the guidance, and I was on a call, a webinar that HSE were doing, and they are kind of at the lead in terms of looking at policies and keeping people safe. And that there was no square footage mentioned there. The person gave the example that you can't really pin it down because it all depends on the setup in your store. For example, if you've got aisles down a supermarket, you could have an aisle as a physical barrier to the customer on the next aisle. So it's completely down to the setup of the premise. I will take that to HSE to see if we can get some sort of answer of ideal preferred measurement, how it applies to shopping centres.
The whole industry would thank you if you could get something from the HSE.
Yeah, I'll try and get something and come back to you. It might be a week or so because they are, like everybody, it's constant catch up as the law changes.
Thank you, Paul, for that. And I think that's critical, isn't it? Because it's about consumer confidence, being able to come into the centre and feel safe and secure and all of that. Right, I'm now going to David Hall, who operates a community centre and, well, on behalf of community centres. David, your question about how to manage bookings for community halls, etc., community spaces.
Thanks, Diana. Yes, Wimbledon Community Association doesn't run a centre. We haven't done for years.
No, sorry.
We set up a website, Wimblecom, which we run with got a couple of paid staff who are still operating because they operate from home. But we have about 50 odd venues who are registered on the site who we support. And obviously they've all had to close during COVID. And they're struggling because a lot of them are quite small in terms of the arrangements for reopening and how to manage that. I was just wondering if any of the panelists have got any thoughts, or they know where guidance can be found on how to supply that, because that'll be really useful for a lot of them. In particular, is there particular guidance on how many users, when they're hiring out the space, they should limit the number of users? Can they pass all the risk off onto the user, which would be quite a reasonable thing to do under the circumstances? A lot of questions, really, especially since a lot of these organisations are quite small. I don't want to take up a lot of time on this because I appreciate other people got questions. Any guidance would be appreciated.
David, thank you. And I think it's the principle. We don't necessarily, I think it's, obviously we can do detailed conversations outside of this, but just the point of principle I think is a really good one. So Paul, is that you again? Was it someone else in the team? Go on.
It's similar to the last query about how many people can you reasonably fit into a space. So again, I'll try and get the answer from HSE and see what comes back. But the other query around, it's about passing risk. So this would just be my kind of personal position, but without looking into it, obviously consumer contracts are protected, terms can't be unfair. I think off the cuff in this scenario, what I'd probably see as fair is that the business clearly states upfront to the consumer, we're hiring out this area and there's a safe limit to how many users there are. If you go over and above that, you're putting the users at risk. I think that would be fair, but it would all look at how prominent is that information in advance of them hiring the venue.
I think additionally, when each person carries out their own risk assessment, that'll also identify some of these issues that have been brought up from the last two questions and help you in assessing numbers of people within an area as well.
And we've got a question just alongside that, which is about, are there currently restrictions on how many people can meet in a group together, which I think there are, but if one of you could confirm that.
Yeah, the current
anyone?
restrictions are 6 people meeting outdoors, and you shouldn't be meeting anybody indoors. However, you know, government's now talking about these bubbles, but that's not really retail and consumers. That's looking at socially between 2 different families. Could those 2 bubbles meet together, and if they were exclusive?
Yeah.
So as it applies to business, well, there is no limit on how many consumers can you invite into your premise. All you need to do is follow the COVID compliance secure guidelines, which talk about doing the risk assessment. And I think I will put that question about how many people per square meter to HSE, but obviously the number of people you could get in a shopping centre where you've got high ceilings, it's much better ventilated, is probably more than the number of people that could fit into a much smaller, lower ceiling space, because ventilation is key when you're talking about how safe it is for people to be next to each other.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay, we have one now about queuing from Mark at Robert Dias. Anyone that knows the Robert Dias store in Wimbledon, I can understand his question. So Mark, ask your question, please.
Yes, hello. It's just regarding the queuing outside. We are anticipating that and hoping that will be quite popular when we reopen. But what we're looking at doing is queuing down the side of our building, which is the sideway between us and Blacks and Morrison's towards Morrison Car Park. Now that area is being used by some street vendors, and in my initial discussions with 1 or 2 of them, they seemed quite resistant about the idea of us queuing down that wall. I was wondering what provisions might be put in place either to support them moving forward 2 feet to create a channel down behind the backs of their vans so we can queue, or if there's any other way we can do it. We have kind of been looking at it for some weeks, and I can't see an alternative option because obviously we don't want to queue in front of other stores as much as we can.
Okay, lovely. I think that's maybe David and Steve to come in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to make an initial, and David will probably have his comments to make as well. If you imagine the same scenario for Blacks as well, they'd probably want to use the side if they get a number of people. I'm a little worried about the 2 feet forward. The store would need to be 2 meters, which pushes it to the center line. That is therefore no longer an easy passage for people. Also, the street trading position is licensed. I think David will explain that you can't just move it. It would have to go under consultation. I think in fairness, it's more about once you're open and managing the queue as best you can, we'll start to look at what is feasible and what isn't. There's a likelihood that there will be businesses that may not suffer the same queuing that you do at the same time, and that you can work together to do that. It is about bringing the businesses together, working together and trying to get a solution as best we can to something we really know we can't turn around and say, this has got to happen. It's just, it's not that straightforward, I'm afraid. But I think going down the side wall, you could probably queue 1 person as long as you're 2 meters away from the stall, leave a break and then continue your markings for queuing further down the wall on that one side. That would leave blacks the opportunity, and there would have to be discussions with Morrison's to try and get their queue to go down the car park behind the cars. But then you've got a problem with people getting in and out of the cars. It really is a difficult one to try and answer in this webinar, but I hope some of those will give you an idea of the kind of things we're thinking of to try and get you back up and running.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I mean, I think there's probably a response to that. What I will say is, because I know Helen Clark-Bell from Love Wimbledon has been raising this on behalf of the retailers in Wimbledon. So I think if we could ask that outside of this, there is a dialogue about these, if you like, pinch points. I think that would be really helpful, because obviously I think the retailers are really keen to get open and trading and manage in the best way. So if we could take that as an action, I think that would be really useful. Right, I'm now going to go to someone that runs a business from home, a therapy studio, and a very interesting question about risk assessments and licensing. So that's from Del from Del Therapy. Come on in, Del. Hi there. Hi.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so there was a question just regarding, so part of my professional body I belong to and the insurance, then forcing us to do, we had to do some training on how to open and run your business within this kind of therapy business. And included in that was to do a health and risk assessment, which they require for our insurance. So I know, Heather, you mentioned that you'd like the businesses to present these to yourselves. Does that include those that have to do it for the insurance as well? Or is it just a person thing?
I think we're encouraging all businesses to carry out their risk assessment. We're not necessarily asking you that you send them all in to us. If we, as we carry out our back to work activities, you need to make them available to us if necessary.
All right.
To give you some additional advice, we have a template available and advice in carrying out your risk assessments.
I would like to see that, because we've been given a template, but they did say we could use whatever's better for us. So thanks, Heather. Thank you, Diane.
That's a pleasure, and I think it's a really important point, isn't it, is that this whole requirement on businesses to do a thorough COVID-19 risk assessment, it is a very big piece of work. So I think if there are templates and all of that available that simplify some of that, and I know that there are, and obviously I've mentioned Steve Bennett's for workplaces, so I think that would be really helpful if we could get that shared and distributed, because obviously all of those in those businesses that are looking to reopen from the 4th of July will want to get going on that from now, won't they? Right, I think we have another question from Marjan. I don't know what that is. Marjan, yes, come on in.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead. Oh no, you've muted yourself again.
Okay.
That's it.
Hi. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, sorry. It started morning time, it's afternoon time. My question is to the panel. Please answer as you think that your expertise will let you. Actually, twofold. One of them is that I'm in contact with lots of my colleagues in different countries in Europe, and lots of countries that have reduced down the social distancing distance based on the WHO recommendation from 2 meters to 1 meter, which has got a huge impact on how people queue or how people they're going to use facilities. So I know nobody has got a crystal ball about what the government is going to say, but based on your own experience, do you think there are going to be any changes into that in any foreseeable future? That's one.
Okay. Can we take that one first then, Marjan? And I'll just add to that, because one of the things I think is the cost of buying all these stickers that says stay 2 meters apart, and then if that changes. But anyone in RSP got a view on that? I know there's no guidance on it. So Paul, could you come in and just say something to Marjan on that?
Yeah, I mean, each government is making their own choices. There's very different policies in some countries. Some countries have not had any lockdown and have dealt with the virus very differently. So we obviously, this is going to be a decision by Boris at the central government level. We've got no information to indicate that there's any change from a 2 meter policy in the foreseeable future. All we can direct anybody to is the kind of government plan to come out of lockdown, which is essentially around, his words are, we want to get back to normal at the earliest point possible, and he's guided by what the scientists say is what's possible. So they're driving to get us back to normal as soon as it's safe to do so. But you know, we know that this is going to be something that's long term. So you know, until that we have an antivirus, there is going to be still some sort of social distancing. So yeah, there's nothing I could say about the 1 meter. It's not being floated at the moment.
I think there was a lot of debate on that on the TV this morning. So
my opinion briefly, just
Mick, yeah.
Absolute certainty that we'll go to 1 meter. So don't stick your stickers down at 2 meters. It's an absolute certainty we'll go to 1 meter. By this time, it will change. That's just my opinion. There you go.
And you know, Mick, you know, you do have to make some assessments, don't you, at this point in time, because it really is fast moving, and we see it daily, don't we?
The economic pressure is such that it'd be impossible to live as it is.
Yeah. Okay, now before I go back to Marjan, has anyone else got one final question, so I'm fair to everyone? Otherwise I will go back to Marjan. I think I've covered all of those that were put in the chat. Okay, Marjan then, is it?
One more question, sorry. Again, question to the panel. Can I ask, what's your advice in regards to risk assessment if you're renting a facility or a space, so you're not leasing it, you don't have a 24/7 access to it, and you don't have a full complete control over what's happening? In terms of risk assessment, how such risk assessment for a business like me, which operates at the rented facility, should be done?
Yeah, and I just add to that, a great example there, Marjan. You know, it's about shared use of kitchen facilities, toilets, the like. Where does that responsibility lie? Because I was thinking that actually it would apply to community spaces, anywhere that rents within a broader space. Where does the responsibility lie? Does anyone in the RSP team have a view on that?
Both parties, if you're running your own business, you will be required to carry out a risk assessment, and that will be highlighted within your risk assessment, as well as the controls that you have to have in place and your safe working practices. So alongside that, the person that's renting out the office space or shop space or whatever it might be will also be required to carry out their risk assessment. And so there should be interventions in place to ensure everybody's safe.
So can I clarify on that then, Helen? So, you know, I for example operate in a managed workspace. So we use the toilets and the kitchen. Am I responsible for doing an assessment on their toilets and kitchen, or are they responsible as the landlord?
I think this would depend on how your business is being run, really. So ones that get slightly more not so straightforward, like this.
Also breaking up, unless it's me.
Sorry, it might be worth sending a question in particular with details.
Yeah, well, Luke, to get a more detailed answer on that, I mean, I would say, to give you an example, if you're talking about you hire out shared facilities where there's a shared kitchen, so you as the person hiring out that premise would do your risk assessment, which might look at things like, is the running water, the